This is Brandon Nelms here for 3D Vision Technologies, and I'd like to welcome everyone to the latest installment of our how-to webinar series. During this webinar, if you've got any questions or comments, please feel free to submit those in the chat window, and I'll try and address as many of them as I can as time allows. Today we're going to be talking about SOLIDWORKS Visualize and how you can create magazine quality rendered animations with Visualize Professional. To get started, when we think of photography and we think of professionals and amateurs, think of pros and joes, what do we tend to think with the professional? We often think, it's a paid service, so we're going to see higher quality, right? Well, how come nowadays we can see amateur photos that seem just as much real and just as nice as professionals? Well, certainly, it's a combination of things: skill, passion, practice. What about tool set? Nowadays, there's tools available for folks who want to be professional but are still amateur photographers. Before we get started, we're going to be using a DeWalt drill series that I got on GrabCAD. So thanks for this model. If anybody wants to see that model, you can go to GrabCAD to download it. When we talk about, professional results, that not only requires those professional tools like we were talking about, but it also requires a professional mindset. So today we're going to take this approach from really a professional media's person perspective, and the idea of how do you direct a movie? How do you get virtual reality with limited input? How do you create multiple versions of things? How do you create your renderings on your schedule? And then lastly, we're going to talk that maybe we don't necessarily need to upgrade our hardware like we talked about earlier. All of these things are professional tools which are in Visualize Professional. When we create animations, we want to have that feeling like we're a director, right? We want to specify our storyboard to get that vision from our head onto paper, and then simply just say action, right? And get our video to play. Inside of SOLIDWORKS Visualize, it's much like that. All we have to do is go to View and see our timeline. For this situation, I've already set up some actors that have some animation in here. You can see each of these are keyframes. Much like that storyboard, we're telling these actors where to be at certain times in our animation, and it's just creating our storyboard. If we play this animation, we'll see that it doesn't look perfect. We're seeing some graininess here, and really that has to do with the fact that we're trying to render all of this at a higher quality. So when we create animations, we want to go straight to the preview mode. And this is going to allow us to see how our actors are moving, and it's more like that storyboard. So if you were to think, storyboard, and we're going to play and pause. If we were to flip through that storyboard, but we're trying to do it in real time, the more detailed our picture that we're drawing ourselves is, it's going to be more difficult to render. With it at that preview mode, it's a lot easier to see what's going to happen. You can see I've already animated a camera. We'll talk about how to do that a little bit later. But if I go to my cameras to see that animated camera and make it active, we can see that it just slightly slides around this drill here. If I switch back to a higher quality resolution and go to play this, you're going to see I get quite a bit of graininess, and that's that picture book we were talking about. It's a little too difficult for Visualize to try and render everything all the time in real time. So what I'm going to do is switch to my free camera, come over here to the preview mode, and that free camera is allowing me to zoom around and take a look at my actors here and tell them where they need to be for different positions without having to mess with my actual camera. This is more like me having the ability to just kind of walk around set and just leave the camera that's going to actually shoot the movie alone. And as I scrub through this animation that I've created, I can see the trigger guard, or the trigger is pulled in. And that's what then we have the drill spinning around. So we're pulling the trigger in. I want to add in another animation of having the safety switch move in a little bit. So just by selecting that safety switch, right-clicking and saying Add Keyframe, we're at the start there. I'm telling that actor, that's where I want you to be at the start. I'm moving to another position and just slightly modifying the position of the actor and saying Add a keyframe there. So now I've told the actor where to be at another frame. Just like our storyboard, I'm going to the next position I want to be, and I'm going to say Add a keyframe there. And for my last keyframe, I want to go ahead and use the same location I used before. So to do that, I'm just going to come over to my first keyframe and right-click and say duplicate that keyframe, and then drag it all the way to the end of my animation. And now as I scrub through, I can see it's moving, but in between, that safety happens to be moving on its own. Well, this is the actor. I've told it where to be at position 1. I've told it where at 2 and at 3. But between 2 and 3, it's doing a little improv, saying, I think I want to do something moving on my own. So just by editing that keyframe, I can tell Visualize, how do I want this to move in between those actions, in and out of those actions. So I can go ahead and say, hold that position. So don't try and do any improv here. And I can go to play this and see how does that look. And it looks like, it's still got a little bit of motion. So I'll go ahead and edit that keyframe as well. But this is that director's chair we were talking about, where I'm getting to easily see where all these actors are and what they're doing and scrub through this quick and easy. So that animation looks like it's about what I want. And we'll go ahead and flip over to the animated camera that I had showed you before. To animate a camera, it's very simple. We just right-click and say Add a keyframe. And then that's now all of a sudden told Visualize that that camera is to be animated. And I just move around my model at different positions and say Add a keyframe, just like we did with the actors. It's all the same stuff. We say right-click, Add a keyframe. We can also, for this camera, add post-processing options. That is part of Visualize Professional as well. So this is that ability for us to do, CGI enhancement type stuff, or really give our animations the look that we want to be our signature. So in this case, I'm adding in motion blur to give it a little more realism. And to render it, it's just a matter of going to Render and then Movie, and specifying whatever render options that I want. So I can specify the size, the format, output, and then how do I want that to be output. And we can just start our animation. Then we get a high quality video. In this case, it's only a couple seconds, but high quality with that motion blur and the camera moving around and all the actors moving. So you can see we're providing our customers with an unparalleled customer experience. Right? They're seeing videos of lifelike components, lifelike materials, and a lifelike animation. And there's really an intuitive director's workflow. I'm just saying different positions that I want different actors, and I'm creating that storyboard. Next thing I might want to do is having virtual reality and try to get it with its limited setup. And I'm not talking about the virtual reality like we see on TV now all the time with putting a phone up in Google glasses and stuff like that. What I'm saying is, imagine you've got your customer that's sitting there trying to look at your product. And what if there was an easy button you could push, and now all of a sudden it feels like he's actually playing with your product? So he actually sees all of the different angles, and he's the one that is actually navigating the experience. There's really no setup that's needed to do this. We're just going to flip back to the free camera that we had positioned before. And then I'm going to center this model by selecting the model and then using a Control Shift and double click to center up my model in my graphics screen there. And then I'm going to check that there's no clipping Meaning, as I rotate this around, I'm going to rotate it around. I don't want to see in my viewport that model being cut off in my viewport, because if you attended our how-to webinar previously on Visualize, you'll know that viewport is what we're actually rendering. So I don't want any of that to clip. As long as it's not clipping, from there, it's as simple as going up to create an output. So we'll go to the top, create our output, and go to our rendering. And instead of doing a output mode of a image, we're going to say let's do a VR or virtual reality. So that's another option for Visualize Professional. Virtual reality, this is going to allow us to dictate the start angle, so how far across, and the end angle, as well as the orbits and images to give us our resolution. Think of virtual reality as like an exterior model. There's also panoramic that you saw there in the drop down, which is for like interiors, if you wanted to do like an interior of a big space. From there, I just can say start, and there's that almost one click, right? We just made sure that we had enough. No clipping. And then we said start our virtual reality. From there, we get an output that's an HTML we can use, and when we open, all I'm doing here is left-clicking and dragging, and as a consumer of this media, I am telling the story. I get to move around and see, what does this actually look like? I don't feel like anything's being hidden from me as a user, right? I'm moving everything around. The question may be, what is this comprised of? It's not necessarily a video, right? It's something that's virtual reality. And how does Visualize deal with this? Well, Visualize actually does a bunch of images, and that's what this is automating for us, making it very easy. If I dig down into the roots of this, it's actually got all of these images that get rendered, and just navigating through this with Picture Explorer here, you can see it's just all of these different images, and as a user, I was able to left click and drag in the graphics window, and that's what moved the model, and it just goes from one image to the next. The more you add, obviously you can see there's quite a few here, which is why these types of renderings take a little bit of time. But the more you have in there, the less sputtering there is, the less glitches as far as the resolution for the end user. So you can see that virtual reality really gives us that interactive customer experience, right? They're able to tell the story. And customers don't second guess the product. They know what they're getting, and they feel like they're already ready for it when it's going to hit the door. Now, DeWalt obviously has their classic brand here, which is that yellow color. But what if I want to create multiple versions of this? Maybe we're looking at a new brand image and we're trying to figure out we want to go to a different color or something. I want to be able to have multiple versions of something. And that's something that's built in with SOLIDWORKS Visualize Professional as well. What if I wanted to go from this to having multiple different versions, multiple different colors, and see what those different options would be? Inside of Visualize, it's as simple as adding a new configuration. We'll call this one red. And I'm going to go over to my libraries to get an image, a appearance, and I'm just left clicking and dragging and dropping it on the model. It's really that simple, right? You just navigate through these different, I've added a few configurations into this already, but you can see we've got a blue one and a green one. We've also got this one that's got way too much yellow, but we've got also this red one that we just created. We can always switch back to our base configuration, so this is where we start from. And if it was just colors, we might say, you know what, that's not really professional level. I can do that of just doing different colors. What makes it professional is all of the different things we can configure. If I go to the part selection mode and say, you know what, with the right mouse button, I want to set this visibility in a new configuration. I'm going to say, let's hide this in a new configuration. And now I've got a configuration there's our blue. It's been unchanged. We've got our green. And now we've got a version that's hiding that. Again, you might say, well, Still seems pretty simple, but this is adding a bunch of different options for me really easily. I've also added in some cameras already. You can see I can switch through these different cameras. These cameras are all options as well. They've got different post-processing things that are part of the professional package, and we're just looking at, different filters, different zooms. We've got some blur and things like that. But I've got these different sets and post-processing options with vignettes and filters, because what if I want to create quick switches between these different filters or these different cameras? Well, same thing. With a right click, I can set this camera to be a new configuration, and then it's easy to rename it, where we just are going to call it, camera filter 1. And this makes it easy for me to see all these different options and switch between these. I can also copy a configuration. So let's say we like this blue one, but we want to use the blue and one of the cameras on top of it. So I'll switch to that configuration and copy it. Specify that this is going to be the blue bit camera. So I'm going to zoom in on the bit area. So I'm going to make that bit camera active. And that bit camera's also got some post-processing for vignette and things. But you see, as I switch through these different configurations, it makes it easy for me to have different options without having to create different projects. And this is what we talk about when we talk about a professional level tool. Being able to switch through things very quickly with minimal setup. If we go to the green one, we can also configure the environment. So I'll go to the Environments tab, and we'll bring in, some mountain views here. So we'll take a look at what does that environment look like. And you'll notice that that environment isn't transferred across the other configurations. When you switch back to the default, notice that it still keeps the camera that was last active, because that's what was used before, and you can switch back. It's not locked in the way a configuration is, so you can switch them around. And notice, going to our green there, we've got the environment coming back for us as well. So this is a quick way for us to get a bunch of different options, whether it be appearances, cameras, scenes, part visibility, just a bunch of different options that we can switch through and show potential customers. Really, it's about minimizing repetitive work. As you saw through that, right, we were able to just add a new configuration and change the color. Add a new configuration and change the visibility. Add the configuration and change the environment. Versus setting that all up or saving a whole new file. So it's very similar to SOLIDWORKS in that standpoint. The other part with this multiple versions that I really like is that idea of what I like the unexpected one. We did the red one real quick, and I was trying to think of a bunch of different options to do just to show different colors. Obviously, DeWalt's not going to change their color. But I was showing a colleague in our office, and she pointed out quickly, hey, I like the red one, which I would have never thought. So it gives me that option to add a bunch of different options really fast, and then let my customer tell me what they like. The next thing that we're going to talk about when we talk about a professional, we think about big-time directors. They're the ones that dictate schedules, right? And things happen on their schedule. What takes the most time for rendering? A lot of times it's the actual render time itself. And this aspect that we're about to talk to is, I think, the most important part of Visualize Professional, and that is the render queue. The ability to send a bunch of jobs to a queue, then with a simple click of starting queue, it's just going to create all of those jobs, one right after another. Let's take a look. We've created all of our configurations. You may have said, well, that was great. We created all those configurations. Not that big of a deal. Well, it is when you look at it, where we can go in and say, from a render perspective, let's go render all of those configurations. Now we can render all of those configurations, and I can say, let's render these all to the queue. And now that adds that job into my queue, which I haven't started yet. You can see there's another job that was in there from before that I added. I can switch to a different configuration. We've done all of those configurations, so it will create this image, but I can also go to this configuration that has, the green and say, not only all configurations, but do all cameras. So it's going to do all of the cameras for this green configuration. If I switch back, let's say go back to our base default configuration, and remember we'll have to switch back to the environment. From here, we know that we don't have any clipping from before. I can specify, instead of all cameras, let's do our virtual reality. You can say, let's take that virtual reality and send it to the queue. We can also specify to send, a video to the queue. We're not limited to the output type going into the queue. It doesn't have to do one set of specific jobs. We're just specifying these all in the queue. And you'll notice next to the different items, I'll go ahead and start this queue. Next to the different items, there's arrows on the left there that I can start them or move them up and down in the queue. And this is where I can now close Visualize and let the queue run while I get to go home. You can see this is what allows us to really let those machines work while we play or while we go home and see our kids. And it's how we keep projects on track. If we want a bunch of different options, we're not limited to choosing what do we want to render because we have to wait on a render time. We can just send a bunch of options to the queue and let it work overnight. Lastly, when we talk about professional tools, we were talking about the hardware, right, of a photographer. And I said, you know what, we're going to talk for Visualize Professional, maybe not necessarily upgrading our hardware. Because you may go to render something, right, and it looks fairly slow in the queue. You think, well, it's probably because I got this old machine. So let's get rid of it and then spend a bunch of money on a brand new computer to see that the render time is about the same, maybe a little bit faster. Well, the professional solution to that is utilizing a network, a bunch of machines to actually render a job. With Visualize Professional, we get one seat of a product called Visualize Boost, and that's what allows us to render across a network. So here, I'm adding a Boost network, so we've got a network cluster that's actually in our Cincinnati office, and I was doing this remotely from Indianapolis, remoted into a machine. This screen you're looking at here is a screen from Cincinnati. And you can see I've got two nodes that are connected, two machines that are connected to this third one that I'm remoted in on. And that's what's giving me my Boost capability. So we've got our preview option for our fast preview and our accurate. There's also this rocket ship, you may have wondered what it was, and that's our power boost. This allows us to utilize those boost nodes in that cluster in real time. You'll see that it's that green power boost there tells me power boost is running, and that default name that's there, that's the name of the cluster that's being used. So right here, this machine is utilizing other machines to help it render faster. So we can do that in real time. We're not limited to just doing it in real time. We can also set it up to render jobs and utilize those other machines to render our jobs. So if we go to our render outputs, we can specify to utilize you can see the rocket ship there, the boost that we're using. And we can always send that to a queue, which is going to do it in a queue format, or we'll just do start render so you can see here how this is working. You can see it's starting the render and it's sending the information across the network and utilizing, since we did the start render, utilizing this machine as well. And it's going to start rendering this across the network. And I know it's working because I can see that default name and I can see the number of nodes that are being used. So I've got 2 nodes that are being used to render this across the network. And just like rendering normally on a standard tool, I'm going to see time remaining and things like that. But it's going to allow me to render much faster. For this video here that I've got, I did the testing on our Cincinnati lab. We've got Dell Precision 7710s with NVIDIA M3000M Quadro cards with 4 gigs. And the testing I saw was essentially based on the number of nodes that you have. You can see there 0 is just doing it on the one machine remotely. 1 is doing it on that machine as well as 1 additional boost node, which you get there for free with having Visualize Professional. And then we can see 2, 3, and 4. Now, I haven't done additional testing for 5, 6, and 8, 9 nodes. I'm going to do that in the future. So stay tuned and we'll see what those kind of outputs look like. As far as render times go, you can obviously use, entry-level laptops, but you're going to be limited based on time. And if you've got, 1 NVIDIA card, it may take an hour. If you've got 2 of the same card, it's going to take 40 minutes on the testing that we saw here. And then a VCA card actually takes less than 5 minutes. Something to note with this, with Boost, is that it's not necessarily always, like we'll see here, different cards. It's not a one-to-one relation as far as if I add another card, will I get half the time? Not necessarily. But we can minimize that amount of render time and really maximize our production. So you can see here, cards, we've got 2 times the M4000 there, where it's going to be about 5.5 times faster than just a traditional CPU, and compare that to 3.5 times where we might think that it's should be somewhere around 8 or so. Like I said, it's not a direct one-to-one, but it does allow us to decrease our render time. When I'm saying don't upgrade hardware, really it's about leveraging all of our assets, right? If we've got the right hardware that can run it, they're just not running it, we can leverage those assets. And we can also work in parallel to running jobs. So I can send stuff out on the network utilizing the queue versus the render the way I did. Send it out on the network, let it do jobs, and allow myself to work in parallel. We talked that Visualize is that professional tool, right? We can direct a movie and give that unparalleled customer experience where they see something that looks real. We can give them an interactive experience where it's just as easy as pushing that easy button. We can have a bunch of different versions where we can add configurations and we minimize that repetitive work. We can use our render queue so that we don't have to sit and wait on renders. We can let those renderings happen overnight. And lastly, we said, don't necessarily go and upgrade your hardware. Look at leveraging the assets you have by utilizing Boost Network. Started out saying, the pros we tend to think of as that have the high-end hardware or have the high-end tools, and the Joes have the tools there on the right. When we think of creating content for customers, Visualize is what gives us that pros level tool, whereas utilizing maybe screen grabs out of SOLIDWORKS is that what Joes are doing. All right, we'll take a look and see if we've got any questions. And it doesn't look like we do. We'll give another second here. If anybody's got any questions they want to type in the chat window while I'm waiting to see if anyone has any questions. Be sure to tune in next time, March 1st, where we've got a how to solve for eDrawings. Ryan's going to talk about the free view tool from eDrawings. Looks like that is it. We don't have any questions, so appreciate everyone tuning in, and catch us next time on March 1st.